I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. The Maryland Prepaid College Trust is a state-run, tax-protected college savings plan that allowed families to buy in-state tuition at Maryland schools at current rates as a hedge against future tuition increases. The Prepaid College Trust was set up by the state as an independently run 529 agency in accordance with IRS Code 529 that allows tax protections for college savings. Almost all states in the union offer 529 plans. Maryland's Prepaid College Trust has been run by the agency in parallel to a 529 investment plan, which functions more like a 401k retirement account, and that has been managed separately by T. Rowe Price. In 2019, the state's Office of Legislative Audits reported that the prepaid trust had overpaid some account holders, which then followed a series of bad management decisions leading to the loss of account values, accusations of mismanagement, and the halting of disbursements to families on the verge of sending their children to college. While the fund was never in any danger of a financial meltdown, the management failures caused protests and hearings in the Maryland General Assembly, which eventually passed a new law bringing the prepaid trust under the direct authority of the state treasurer. And in June 2023, Maryland Treasurer Derek Davis agreed to the monetary demands of protesting account holders. The Prepaid College Trust is now close to new members. The process of making current account holders whole is being worked out. I spoke to two parents caught in the debacle, Lisa Getter-Peterson and Brian Savoy, to get the full story, and it is surprising.
We're not that different. We both go to work. We both pay bills and we shop at the local grocery store. Maybe on weekends we might go to movies or get in the car and take a ride to Baltimore. So I don't know why you think this life I live is strange, but everything I do, you do just about the same.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are dirty, messy, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. area folk singer-songwriter Stephen Gelman, whose new album, All You Need, was released last week. Guest appearances on the album include several members of the folk band Seldom Seen, Nina Gerber, Kathy Fink, and Marcy Markser, and also includes the Scottish fiddler Bonnie Rideout. You can find Stephen Gelman's music at hiddenpoet.com.
We don't love differently. I'm just like you, you're just like me.
In the news news this week, we begin in Vermont, where the electric utility Green Mountain Power has made a surprising proposal to the state government, saying that they would like to buy and install batteries in ratepayer homes because doing so would be cheaper than building more power lines. This is perhaps the first such statement by a regulated utility in the US, even if the viability of this approach comes only from the low population density in Vermont, such that savings from not building long stretches of new power lines would be sufficient to cover the cost of the batteries. In contrast, in a more densely populated state like Maryland, battery costs would be higher than the cost of a new power line. But this is the kind of new thinking utilities need to be doing. Instead, Maryland's utilities are dealing with retail supply choice, which has been an utter failure. Closer home in West Virginia, the state's flagship school, West Virginia University, has laid off 140 faculty members as part of a plan that school president Gordon G. has described as academic transformation. West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the Union, with smaller education budgets, and now the university is being gutted to be run more like a private company. States preserve their competitiveness via investments in education, including higher education. We sometimes complain here in Maryland, but really the contrast between the two neighboring states could not be more dramatic. Still closer home, the Baltimore Sun recently reported that only 18% of Carroll County high school students opted for the alternative family life and health curriculum, commonly sex education curriculum, offered by the county's Board of Education, whose members are aligned with the national extremist group Moms for Liberty. The curriculum offered by the Carroll County Board of Education sought to replace the curriculum provided by the Maryland State Department of Education and available in the rest of the state. With September's sales over $90 million, legal marijuana is likely to be a $1 billion industry in Maryland in its first year of operations. This is on par with expectations. Rockville City Council passed a new law allowing attached accessory apartments, also called accessory dwelling units or ADUs. Montgomery County, within which Rockville sits, allows detached ADUs. Rockville has been slow to change on this count. After the strike at healthcare provider Kaiser Permanente, unionized office cleaning workers have begun to rally for a strike ahead of the expiration of their contract with the Washington Service Contractors Association. If a new contract is not negotiated, the workers plan to go on strike October 16th. Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich and County Council President Evan Glass have already signed a pledge to support the union if a strike occurs. It is hard to report the news this week without mentioning the attacks on Israel and the subsequent retaliation against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. As the conflict unfolded in its first few days, I recall that local Jewish comedian Carmia Weinrop, the founder of an interfaith comedy group, is slated to perform at a local synagogue this month. I asked her how the conflict affected her comedy.
Part of me feels like more than ever, we should be having shows. And that's to limit escaping from the other, hiding with your own, a little bit of tribalism, and instead coming together, because the shows aren't just we have a bunch of performers that come to a space of people that are all the same. Most of our audiences are diverse as well. So showing up at a show is saying we want to be together. We want to both learn from who's on stage, and we want to be sitting with people that are different than us. And conversations come after the show between people who are sitting next to each other, just the laughter that builds. I am actually on another show next Thursday at the Boston Jewish Community Center, produced by a guy. His is called Comedy for Peace, and it's almost all of his shows are just Muslim Jewish, not as diverse a range of the performers, but he does do some interfaith stuff. And he has 4 of us, including a Palestinian performer. He himself is a secular Israeli, and I'm representing like the religious side, and there's also another Muslim performer. So the Boston JCC reached out to him and specifically said, we do not want to cancel. This is still really important to us. And he feels the same way, so the show is continuing. A week later, my own synagogue is sponsoring or hosting this show. Actually, the Maryland State Arts Council is sponsoring it. And I am hoping that they do not cancel. There's not an official word about that yet. We've already had like 60 people sign up from the community. It's a free event, and it's not a majority even like our congregants. Now, the jokes that our performers tell on stage is interesting. We've been performing a couple of years together, and almost nobody, like it almost never comes up, the Middle East. It's just not, we like skirt around the issue, and that's the Jewish performers. None of our Muslim comedians have ever done any jokes about the Middle East. And so in terms of conflict there, and it's like our politics don't really shine through in the show. We are really talking about how our religions are amusing or funny or whatever.
So tell me, who are the members of your comedy group? What backgrounds they come from?
We have a pretty wide mix of performers. Honestly, like I lose count. We're just not always available at the same time, so we mix and match for different shows. We have Christians, we have Jews of different flavors, we have someone from the Church of Latter-day Saints. He says some people don't consider him Christian, but as a Jew, I feel like, you're good. We have Muslim performers. We have a former Hindu, now atheist performer. It's arranged. We're getting our first Universalist Unitarian performer. So I'm excited to hear his stuff. But our Muslim performers, none of them are Palestinian. A couple of them are from South Asian backgrounds. And one of our performers was born in Egypt. Her father is Libyan and her mother is Egyptian. She was raised here, actually in Alabama. When she was 5, she moved there.
Have you talked to them since the attack and the retaliation?
So today I had a couple conversations with one of the women who was on the show, the woman whose family's from Libya and Egypt. And we mostly were trying to make plans to go to see another show at another time together because we want to just sit next to each other and laugh. I think that we're talking about finding time to be together and show up together in spaces because we think that is important. There is one performer who is feeling a little hesitant around performing right now. He said, I don't know if this is the time.
Your next big show is at a Orthodox synagogue, and I'm sure emotions are pretty high in the membership.
I think for a lot of us, this is our work, So my sister lives in Jerusalem with her family, and they are off school because there's no school right now. But my sister's not off work. She can work from home, and her business has not closed down. Her husband works at a bakery. It's like a 5-minute walk, and he is also going. This show that I have coming up in a couple of weeks, I have continued marketing for it locally, and 2 weeks ago, it was just free show. Maryland State Arts Council is putting this on. It's in the neighborhood. We hope you guys can come, bring a friend, like very inviting and engaging and celebratory in a way. Although the show itself already upsets people, like those people don't come. So I frame it in a very lighthearted way, even though it's like a serious topic and meant to connect us. 2 days ago, I reposted the picture of the flyer on local social media with the phrase, now more than ever.
Coming together is very, very important. These are sort of long-term projects.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment, your sister living in Jerusalem or other Israelis, do you think they might say that this kind of effort minimizes what happened?
As a woman, I have been raised to think constantly about what other people are thinking. What are my children thinking? What is a potential partner thinking? What is my now partner thinking? What were my parents thinking? What are my teachers thinking? Like, to try to guess. And that is a really difficult speed to live at. And I'm trying to undo a lot of that work just internally. This question feels a little bit like getting at that. I don't know. Some people, of course, will say, no, this isn't the right time. I mean, a person posted on Facebook that they disagree with this Boston show. Now's not the right time for comedy. Wait a few weeks. Okay, well, events don't really get planned like that. The Boston JCC wants to keep going. They're going. Don't show up.
Have you written a new joke since all of this happened?
Yeah, but not about this.
What was your joke?
About how my husband goes to yoga 3 days a week.
Carmia Weintraub, thank you for taking the time. I wish you peace and comedic success.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm never on this show again.
You can find Interfaith Comedy Group's upcoming shows at interfaithcomedy.com. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Lisa Getter-Peterson and Brian Savoy, leaders of a parents group whose money got stuck in the meltdown of the $1.1 billion state-run prepaid college trust.
All the light is left here, and the rain is pouring down. I feel like some beat-up toy left in the lost and found. I long for sandy beaches in the roar of ocean sound, from tall cliffs with redwood trees in the lovely northern towns of California. California, California, California.
Lisa Getter-Peterson, Brian Savoy, welcome to I Hate Politics. You are both parent leaders of a group of Maryland 529 account holders who believe that you were failed by the state government. And this is a problem on the prepaid college trust fund side rather than the regular investment plan side. Can you describe what the basic problem was, how things went down?
I think for me and the families that I started talking to in August of 2021, for me the challenge came up, or when I became aware of it, it started back in April of 2021. My son started as a freshman in September of 2021 at an out-of-state university. And I think one of the things that I noticed was just bad communication with the servicer from the start. But what I learned in August of 2021 is that the earnings or interest component of my account would not be available to me. And I learned that in August of 2021, about 3 weeks before I needed it in order to pay for my son's college tuition. What that meant to me was about a difference of $25,000 for my son's account. What I didn't know and would soon learn was just how many people were impacted.
The Maryland 529 Prepaid Trust was part of an independent agency of the state of Maryland. Its purpose was twofold. You could get into it and you could buy prepaid college tuition. They told you, look, the cost of tuition was going to rise astronomically. So you could lock in, tomorrow's tuition at today's prices. Well, that turned out to be a lie because Maryland in-state tuition did not rise astronomically. So many parents who bought into this plan thinking they were making a good investment were discovering that, their principal was essentially you could have just gone to a Maryland school and paid it and it would have been the same thing. But our contracts also had a provision that you could roll it over with 100% of investment earnings after 3 years. And you could roll it over to the other arm of Maryland 529, which was the investment plan. In 2019, the Office of Legislative Audits took a look at the Maryland plan. And one of the things it said was some people had gotten excessive benefits when they rolled over their plans. They also said, Maryland pays out more than other states do. When the 2019 audit came out, the board, because it was an independent agency, so they had decided after 2019, we're going to upgrade our systems. We're going to get a new vendor to come in and we're going to ensure that everything is handled professionally. One of the things that the executive director at the time said was, but we're also going to try and make it fair so that, they had never given a rebate to customers. One of the things, because tuition did not rise in Maryland, the fund had exceeded 130%. And under the law that set it up, once you get past 130%, you can give a rebate to your account holders. At one point, the fund was at 180%. So they said, look, we've never done this, but let's try to make the system fair. And we'll give 6% retroactive interest to everybody who's in the trust at this point. And that came out of the 2019 audit, which mentioned, people with rollovers getting more money than people who just used tuition benefits.
The rollover option was for those families that did not use Maryland state school tuition. Because the fund could only pay tuition to Maryland schools, this is an option out to pay private schools or out-of-state schools.
You have to see, this trust grew, right? It grew astronomically from the beginning. And one of the reasons it grew was because people bought in at very high rates for tuition that didn't rise. So the investment managers also, about the only thing they did well was they managed it pretty well. We're talking about a fund that had $1.1 to $1.3 billion at its height. And it's, which was more than it needed to pay the tuition just at Maryland state schools. There was a way you could get excess benefits. The smartest thing that any account holder could have done was to roll over their prepaid trust account, which would give you your earnings, to any other educational fund. It didn't have to be in the state of Maryland.
Okay. Was there, at the time that you signed the original contracts, any interest guarantee?
There wasn't a number. What it said was you would get 100% of the investment earnings. And every year on the annual report, it disclosed the investment earnings. And those earnings, as I've said, were exceeding 6%. One year it was 21%. One year it was negative. But the investment earnings overall were pretty high.
So it's almost a cooperative arrangement where the fund would disburse to its account holders all the money they made in earnings from their investments of the fund balances.
Only if you rolled over. If you stayed in the fund, you didn't get that money.
So there was an incentive really to roll over.
Right. And very few people knew about it.
And the Office of Legislative Audit found this loophole in 2019 and said, "What? This is not fair."
I would say that what OLA found during that audit was a myriad of issues. Okay. But one of the things that they saw was that there was a lack of fairness in the distribution system, because the cost of tuition's rise had been, kept very low starting in the O'Malley administration, but earnings were high. Now, if the rise in tuition had not been artificially capped, would that have still been existent? There's no way to know.
So the mismanagement is in the way that they are actually doing their accounting. It is not a mismanagement of the fund itself, which is making a ton of money.
We're not talking about how the fund was managed. We're talking about how the Maryland Prepaid Trust was managed. And what they found was, high turnover of management, record keeping that was sloppy.
We're talking about kind of a next level in, mismanagement of financial documents. We're talking about like boxes full of uncashed checks. We're talking about boxes full of unfiled requests for distribution, or never responded to boxes of unfiled distributions. I mean, these were we're talking about just basic business management that was completely disregarded by the agency.
Do you have a sense of, what the complaints were like before 2019 then?
Well, if you go back and look at previous audits, this looked like for years this was a problem. If you wanted to roll it over prior to where we are now and say how much money is in there, you had to call up. I believe they charged a fee, and they would come up with a manual calculation. This is what your account is worth. And they would do it on a spreadsheet.
The fee was not, inconsequential. I believe it was somewhere like it was about $100. But there were some of the members of our Facebook group who were going through and doing that every year. Okay, so they had this running documentation of what their account value was worth every year. But unless you paid for that statement, the only account that you got of the value of your account each year was basically an accounting of the amount of money that you had paid in.
Right. And so can I ask, did the original contract not have any management fee associated with it?
You paid 2.5% off the top.
When do you know that things are going wrong?
In filing public records requests, we've been able to figure out when they realized that there were significant problems. And they really started in January of 2022. And it wasn't until August of 2022 that any account holder got an official notice that there was a problem. So for 8 months, you've got the executive director and the board in secret trying to fix some problems with the accounts. And they freeze the interest rate and they don't tell anybody.
I would say they even deliberately were covering it up. Okay, they were basically trying to do whatever they could to not acknowledge the scope of the problem to account holders. Okay, just to kind of augment on what Lisa said. Think about that in the life of, a college student. Okay, you're talking about, that 8 or 9 months is a critical amount of time. Okay, for rising freshmen, it's when they were making decisions about where can I send my kid to school. Okay, for parents who've utilized the system, they suddenly have received more benefits than they may have before. And then there's a whiplash. Now I'm receiving so much less than I've ever received before. So, the furor that came out in, between August and December of 2022 was completely related to just this complete lack of certainty and confusion because of, a cover up by, a government agency and its board of directors.
We get to 2022, earnings are frozen. Brian was one of the first parents who realized there was a problem, and he forms a Facebook group because Brian had been filing complaints that the board was meeting in secret. Every account holder who had an email address got a message, and it said there is going to be an emergency board meeting to discuss this situation at 4:00. And I remember this was during break because my kid was home from college. And hundreds of parents call into this board meeting because we were like, well, what is this about? And the then chairman of the board was sort of bullied parents and started asking questions. And they immediately went into executive session. And there were 400 parents on the line. And they forgot to turn off the phone line for the parents. So the board goes into executive session, and the parents are left talking to each other. And it was the very first time that many of us, including myself, understood, wow, this isn't affecting one parent or two parents, but this is a major issue. And parents organized on that phone call. It lasted for several hours. They shared names. Brian was able to tell people about the Facebook group. Everyone joined, and that phone call sort of it skyrocketed the situation from a small group on Facebook to a very large organized group on Facebook with people who suddenly realized we are being screwed by the state of Maryland.
I feel like if it weren't for incompetence, you wouldn't even have found out.
That's probably true.
That's true. Yeah.
When they go into this secret session and leave all of the parents on the phone line, what happens then, which we find out many, many, many months later, is that the board decides to vote that the board's actual intention in June of 2021 was not to give 6% interest retroactively, but to make it prospectively. And that vote does not appear in any minutes of any meeting ever distributed to this day. The only reason we know about it is when Treasurer Davis took over and issued his report that found that the parents were right, the 6% was due to be retroactive. He included it in a footnote.
Okay, how has the state tried to right the ship, including appointing State Treasurer Derek Davis as the authority over the prepaid trust?
And that phone call in December, there was a member of the Maryland General Assembly who I believe was on the December phone call. And behind the scenes, I believe Brian was also talking to other members of the Maryland General Assembly. And Brian can talk about that a little better than I can.
They ultimately did was the bill that passed was a bill to eliminate the Maryland 529 board, to take the structure that was the Maryland 529 independent organization and have it become a, part of the state treasurer's office wholly and completely. Okay. As part of this bill, or this now law, the treasurer was empowered to set an earnings rate. He was not required to do it in a certain amount of time, but really he did it within a month after the turnover occurred. And he was also empowered to set up a claims process where families that were adversely impacted by this could submit a claim to receive remuneration out of the existing funds of the trust.
It raises questions about the governance model of state established independent agencies. There are lots of them. The Department of Education is sort of kind of set apart. There is, some procurement authorities that are set apart. And the people that get appointed to that are usually in and around the political leaders that appoint them.
Well, certainly. I mean, and if we use the 529 board as an example, partially because they don't exist anymore and they were dissolved, is that it was the way that was structured is that there were 6 members who came from government, and then there were 6 public members, and those people were they were appointed by the governor. They, in the case of that board, they were appointed by Governor Hogan. These were people who were, friends with the governor. They had done, they may have been donors or other things along those lines. And Lisa mentioned, a whistleblower that we worked with, Spencer Fell. In my first conversation with him, he said to me, he's like, the board, it was definitely a gift. The board would come in, every month. They would have this beautiful spread of food. It was a nice time. They would come in, they would have a meal, they would vote on a few things, and they would go. So it was a real honor. And I think that's the challenge. It was an honor, but was it seen as a responsibility? And it's that lack of viewing it as a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility at that got this board into such hot water.
Well, it seems that we are missing a crucial part of this, right? Which is that professionalization. I'm sure boards, Montgomery County has hundreds of boards and the state has hundreds of boards. You can't professionalize all of them. Some of them are, most of them are appointed. But where there is real money to be taken care of, there should be some professional supervision. You can't just run it amateur style.
One of the things that I noticed from looking through the board minutes, and it was in 2015, this board, it may not have been the same people, but they actually voted to get rid of their own D&O insurance because they were advised that the state would have their back. And to me, that decision says it all. The state of Maryland had their back. They could do whatever they wanted.
Edit note. D&O insurance refers to directors and officers insurance, a policy that protects directors and officers of any organization from mistakes and malfeasance. Back to Lisa Getter Peterson.
And the bill that was actually enacted really ties people's hands in being able to sue the state of Maryland over this whole 529 situation.
How?
It basically says that the exclusive remedy for getting anything out of the 529 would be to go through the claims process. The only way to really get anything more out of Maryland would be to file a lawsuit and challenge the constitutionality of the bill that put the treasurer in charge. And, that would have to be your first step. And none of us really wanted to do that.
Well, it seems like the effort has been to mollify the account holders by giving them that 6% that they were promised, not really fix the business processes.
Okay, so let's go through what happened. Okay, so in June of 2021, the board was presented with a 120-page document of business rules that were going to be implemented by the vendor. Okay. The board voted on it. They voted, they were like, yep, these are the business rules. Over the preceding 6 months, that software was validated. It was validated as correct. There were meetings. Lisa has emails between the vendor and between the executives at Maryland 529. There were problems in the transition. There were always problems with software transitions, but they got them correct. They were following the business rules. They implemented it. Okay. I don't have any problems with the vendor. Okay. The vendor was put into a terrible situation that no other state had ever put them through. And I think that, they have honored the terms of their contract by not speaking out more publicly than they have.
The thing that we need to go back to then is really how these boards are constituted. And I think you made the point that, the way they're appointed is pretty problematic. I mean, what are we looking at? Mostly they are friends of politicians that are appointing them.
Yeah, I think that's when you go down to root causes, that's probably where the root cause lies. Okay, you're talking about rot within an agency that was seen in there for not just starting in 19. I mean, you go back years and years and years. The rot was always there. The board wasn't doing anything about it.
And I think what's clear, and this really only came out when we won our public records battles, is that I don't think the board read in its entirety all the documentation it was presented. Because if it had, it would have known that what it was doing. For the board to say we didn't know the 6% was retroactive, it's just not believable. And if it is believable, it means you're admitting that you failed in your fiduciary responsibility because you didn't read what you got from the executives. So it's it's one of two things. I didn't do my job, or I didn't do my job.
The one other question that has been on my mind after learning about all of this is, should the state be in the business of running a investment fund like this? I mean, with pension funds, I understand they're stuck with it. What are they going to do? But you're getting money, you're making this investment, you're promising that you'll share the spoils, the earnings with everybody. And, it's just, why are we in this business?
Yeah, I think looking at it through hindsight is always 2020, right? Okay. And Sunil, people have asked me a flip of that question, which is like, if you knew what you know now, would you invest in the prepaid college trust? And I'm like, well, no, obviously there's no way in hell I would do that. Okay. But the reason why I did in the first place was because, the state is a powerful image. Okay. It harkens back to Roman temples and things along those lines, as far as, the imagery associated with that. And it's a powerful image. Okay. But you hit on a good point. Okay. Is, as I was in Annapolis, I was, and Lisa was there too. We were there at the comptroller's first day in office, her first time testifying to any committee. And what is she asking for? She's talking about aging infrastructure inside the comptroller's office. What does the comptroller do? They collect our state tax dollars. Okay, they issue refunds. Okay, they validate it. But they were talking about how poor their computer systems were. Well, that's an entity that you think probably has more funding than an independent organ of the government like the Maryland 529 was. So should they be doing it? No, probably not. But I think that we need to be able to have trust in the state institutions that are set up, that are doing the work that are doing. I think that the fact that this has been rolled into the treasurer and effectively the prepaid college trust is being sunset. It's a really long long sunset. It's like a sunset in Alaska during the summertime, but it's a sunset nonetheless.
Because the bill cut off. You cannot buy a new prepaid trust anymore. The bill cut off that. So if you're in there, you're in there unless you get out. But it's not going to grow anymore.
Brian Savoy, Lisa Getter Peterson, thank you for taking the time to explain a really complex issue. I am glad you got your money back.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I'll be back with the wrap up, including lessons from my conversation with Maryland Prepaid College Trust account holders Lisa Getter Peterson and Brian Savoy. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta.
You got up today, made your bed, brushed your teeth, and you called a friend. Little victories, little victories.
What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Maryland Prepaid College Trust account holders Lisa Getter Peterson and Brian Savoy? This is not a story of failure alone. Two successes lurk behind, and maybe even cause the failure. First, Maryland's ability to stem the fast growth in college tuition costs was so impressive that it left the prepaid college trust with excess money, something that would be fought over later. It was not quite the problem that the 529 board expected. Second, the fund itself performed spectacularly, and that performance, it seems, did hide the business process failures and the amateurish handling of the accounts themselves. I'd be remiss if I did not mention the rollover loophole. The prepaid college trust was designed to pay for in-state tuition. But to make it more attractive, the 529 board decided that they would offer the rollover option to those who really needed it. But as it turned out, the smartest thing to do was to take the rollover, book the interest earnings, and then pay in-state tuition should your child go to a Maryland school. By routing the distribution through the 529 investment plan, account holders were guaranteed to get more, significantly more money than simply asking the prepaid college trust to pay the in-state tuition directly. In effect, there were winners and losers. Those who read and comprehended the rollover fine print knew to take the distribution via the investment plan. Those who did not left large amounts of money at the table. Those who took the rollover essentially gained from the earnings on the fund balances contributed by those who did not take the rollover. It is a good question why the excess earnings were not transferred to a higher education trust fund instead, especially since Maryland colleges and universities took austerity measures to hold tuition costs down. The university system could have used the hundreds of millions of dollars to fund facilities and programs. Whoever designed that initial contract. But once the government had signed the contract and agreed that the excess earnings would be returned to the account holders, there wasn't any way to go back on that. Government legitimacy is not just a public goods problem, but also an expectation problem. Take things away from someone, and the government loses legitimacy. The losses are always higher than the legitimacy gains
of the government actually being able to deliver on its promise. That was one of the big failures, which was then compounded by the fact that the board, which included senior state government officials at that time, the state treasurer, the comptroller, the secretary of higher education, and several public members, were not paying attention to the actual workings of the 529 board, and they failed in their fiduciary responsibilities. They saw an overperforming fund, there was enough money, and they didn't need to look further. The state and the county have hundreds of boards and commissions, some of whom have independent authority and real fiscal responsibilities. There has to be a more professional approach. State Treasurer Derek Davis has diffused the situation with all the money available in the fund. And the prepaid trust is not taking new members, which means that it will be phased out. But whether independent agency boards should be run this way, I don't think anything has changed. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer Daniel Galileo, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. area folk singer-songwriter Stephen Gelman, whose new album, All You Need, was released last week. Guest appearances on the album include several members of the folk band Seldom Seen, Nina Gerber, Kathy Fink, and Marcy Markser, and also includes the Scottish fiddler Bonnie Rideout. You can find Stephen Gelman's music at hiddenpoet.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. Stay safe.
Of a misspent youth. When did I get old? My story is now half told. I just want to sleep, watch TV and eat. My memory's gone. I can't remember the words to my old songs, but in my mind, I'm still 29. I remember this guy, he had such dreams, and they were not to be denied. I want to tell him some will come true, but most of them, they gotta fall right through. When did I get old? And my story is now half told. I just wanna sleep, read my books and eat. My memory's gone. I can't remember the words to my old songs, but in my mind, I'm still 29. 29. Well, that was then. Those days are gone. I need to accept and just move along. I can't do all the things I used to, but I still try to be that guy. When did I get old? My story is now half told. I just wanna sleep, play guitar and eat. My memory's gone, I can't remember the words to my own songs, but in my mind I'm still 29.